Hello, and welcome to this, the third in our series on shooting videos with your camcorder. In this series, we have covered the aspects of shooting with your camcorder and followed on with editing your footage. And along the way, have met experts and professionals in their own field. And the consensus of opinion is, among them all, that a camcorder has revolutionized the way in which everyone can keep a record of family life. Once in a while, there is an occasion which has the ingredients of a perfect marriage between camcorder and its user, and that's a wedding. And there can be times, just like in all marriages, when things don't go quite as smoothly as they might. Up till now, we have shown you how you can use a camcorder effectively, how you can edit your footage to make your finished program more entertaining and informative. However, there's nothing quite like a wedding to put all these skills to the ultimate test. There is nothing the professional video maker dreads more than going into a shooting situation over which they have no control. Even in a controlled situation, such as a commercial film, where they might be working to a planned script and storyboard, they can still be at the mercy of the weather, unforeseen changes in location, breakdown of equipment, and a whole host of other variables. It doesn't do to think about everything that could go wrong too much, otherwise I'm sure that many of us wouldn't go outside at all. Weddings have the added and unsurmountable problem that perhaps dwarfs all other problems mentioned before, and that is the unknown factor. When you take a camcorder to a wedding, you might have some idea what is likely to happen, which is a reasonable assumption, given the timings of the church service and the date on which it is set. I suppose that the date and time of the ceremony itself are probably the only really permanent pieces of information that are unlikely to change, having been given to you well in advance. It's surprising, but even the situation where you might be filming two weddings at the same church but spaced just a week apart, just how different they can be both in style and content for a video. In this film, we shall be looking at the footage shot over a great many weddings. We will show you how you can plan a shoot to try and work around and avoid common problems for video makers on the day. We will talk to people in the industry to get their views about shooting and editing wedding videos, and hopefully gain a few hints and tips towards better production for the future. For those who have turned their hobby perhaps into a source of income, the most likely way in which someone can cut their teeth with commercial work is with a wedding video commission. This is a very good discipline to work within, as it involves all the key elements in program production. You have to meet the client, in this case perhaps the bride-to-be, or her parents, or whoever has decided to engage your services. Obviously, before you get to this stage, it is assumed, hopefully, that you will have worked on weddings before, perhaps for family or friends, and that, encouraged by their feedback on the quality achieved, have decided to offer your services with this in mind. Today, more than ever before, people are very switched on to video, and moreover as to what can be expected from a wedding video. Whereas, say, 10 years ago, the novelty of a video was such that a wedding film could be considered good, even though it might have contained some very big errors in production values. The novelty factor would have discounted this, as the camcorder was not so readily available, or as well specified as those today. A whole new industry has emerged, and is now seen by some as a contender, along with a long-established stills camera, as a means of capturing the atmosphere of the day. We will come on to the relationship of photographer and the videographer a little later on in this programme. Right, even if you're watching this and don't want to get into a profession of making wedding videos, you can still gain a lot from the professional aspects of planning and producing a film. Preparation is the key in both good production and in the practicality of what is and isn't possible when shooting a wedding. Steve Jenkins.
In the course of my professional career, in terms of teaching and training, I would say that the success of any video at any level, from the amateur through to broadcasting, is in the preparation. It's in the planning. It's in the development of ideas. It's the careful, structured planning of what you're actually going to do. That, in my opinion, is at least 80% of whatever you're going to do. That, I find, is very difficult for people in the early stages to actually accept and be able in advance to put their ideas down on paper, to think it through. Most people are very anxious just to pick up the camera and just, shoot for hours and hours, really. But that doesn't make for a successful production. So planning really is the key to it all.
Martin Phillips.
If you don't plan properly, you can end up at the wrong church, you can get the wrong time. Also, it's a very, very good idea to try and meet the bride and groom before the day, because if the church is having a number of weddings on the same day, it is very possible that you could be starting filming the wrong people.
I know it sounds obvious, but a checklist of equipment, especially if the wedding is a long way from home, is essential. And what the professional videographer needs to take along to cover for most eventualities is very comprehensive. This might include tape stock, of course, batteries, not only for the camera but also for the microphone perhaps, microphones themselves, mic stands, headphones for monitoring your sound, a main supply adapter, extension cables, fuses, a tripod of course, lights, don't forget a lens cloth, oh, and the camcorder.
There's a story of a very well-known video company, a very highly thought of video company, that actually made a very major mistake by doing a wedding about 200 miles away from its base and forgetting something as basic as the batteries for the camera. So always check your equipment before you go, especially if you have to travel any distance to get there, because if you find yourself in a situation like that, it can be very awkward for all involved, and it certainly doesn't do your reputation any good whatsoever.
One thing you definitely can't plan for is, of course, the weather. And even in summer, after the longest spell of dry weather, you can bet that come the big day, you will be the one trying to make a video in driving rain. You've got to make the most of things. Umbrellas seem to come into play for some reason, with the result that most shots could end up with just being a sea of coloured canvas with legs. This is hard work, but again, as I've said before, When they're watching the completed video in a week or two, they won't appreciate it if you give up here. You've got to try and capitalise on the situation. It's strange, I know, but it takes a lot of rain to look like a lot of rain on video.
The weather's another very big variable, because if it's raining, the whole structure of the day is altered. You tend to find that everyone will be inside rather than outside, obviously because they don't want to get wet, and that dramatically alters the light levels. So if you do have lighting, take plenty of it along. Also cover for the camera and yourself, because as many cameras have very highly sophisticated electronics in it, water and electronics, as you know, don't mix very well. So try and keep that covered.
Protect your camcorder with a good rain hood cover. And have a lens cloth handy at all times. Come rain or shine, for that matter. Bob Cartwright of AVP.
Right, now weddings are a whole new ball game, and you have to make a decision with your camcorder whether you're doing it for pleasure or you're doing it for profit. Because, quite honestly, let's face it, if you just popped out and you bought yourself a £1,000 camcorder, you are not going to get the same results as the professionals who've been doing it for a long time, who have spent £10,000 or £15,000 on their camera equipment and can support it with the same amount of investment with editing. However, that's not to say that you can't use your camcorder to shoot a wedding, but the choice is yours whether you're doing it for pleasure or for profit. Now, everybody starts perhaps with their friends, because friends will forgive you, because everybody makes mistakes, and it also allows you the facility to do it and have the fun of doing it. But I can assure you, when you're doing a wedding and you're actually doing it commercially, there's no fun involved. It's a one-stop shot. You missed it, you've lost it. If you haven't got the vows on, oh boy, are you in trouble.
I, Tracy,
Tracy,
take you, Colin,
take you, Colin,
to be my husband,
be my husband.
to have and to hold.
So you can see mistakes can happen. So putting the professional side, doing it for profit to one side for a moment, let's talk about you shooting it just for your own pleasure. It's a member of the family, an occasion, and you want to record it well. You can start by taking in the whole day. Now, what you have to remember at the very beginning is that if you're going to make a production of this, even if it's only for your own benefit or for the benefit of the family, you're a production of this, it is a full day's work. But if you're just popping along to shoot a few shots to include in your family video, then you can sit at the back of the reception and enjoy the drinks and so on with everybody else. But if you're going to make a full production of it, it actually starts very early. So let's first look at equipment. Yes, you've got the camcorder. Have you got enough batteries? Have you got enough tape? What about microphones? Are you going to use the onboard microphone all the time, or are you going to attempt to put a microphone on a tripod, perhaps, closer to the reception table for the speeches? What about lighting? You're going to take a small handheld light that clips on the top. What about colour balance? Does the light need a filter? Do you have the filter on the camera? All these little things can make the difference between a pleasantly viewed production and one which changes colour, or the sound goes, or whatever. So, taking a normal wedding day, you could start early in the morning, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, when the bride is perhaps getting ready and getting dressed ready for church.
Which way do you want me to go? This way? Does she want to go okay?
Please, yes. Shall I bring that through for you?
No, that's all right now. Let's try that. Down a minute, please. I've got some sweeties too. Oh, look at any pots we've got. Oh, dear.
Okay, we need Mum and Dad please on win as well.
Right. Don't forget your bouquet.
Right. That's what I mean. Do you need to go quickly? Mum, you can sit right here. This hand's just going to go behind. This leg behind the other one.
Now you'll notice a lot of this footage is handheld, not using a tripod as we discussed earlier. Now you're trying to capture the atmosphere here. You can't miss it. This is a one-stop shot. And if possible, and if they're nearby of course, you try and get a bit of the bride home, jump in the car, whip down the road and get some of the groom, perhaps on the way to the pub for a drink beforehand.
I suppose you haven't got time for a basket meal.
See that Sunday. Well, I ordered one. I don't know if it's going to come through in time. Yeah, no.
That's great. Thanks for that.
So now the situation is you've been up, you've done the bride's home, you've done the groom's home, or he's en route to the church. You've got to get to the church pretty quick because the guests are already arriving. Now guests tend to arrive up to an hour before the wedding. So before they arrive, you need to start doing your establishing shots, your wide shots. So where's the church? What's the location? What sort of day is it? What's the weather like? What are the flowers like inside the church? Who's inside the church? Are the ushers there? Are the ushers talking? Is the best man talking? You've got to capture all this, and you've got to be quick. You've got to be swift. You've got to make sure everything's up and running. You haven't got time for tripods. You haven't got time for battery changes. You haven't got time for tape changes. You've got to get it.
She's gone. It's the first time I've ever been late. How's it going? Stan Johnson, Martin, my best man.
Hello, pleased to meet you. Tony.
Grab me as if I'm going that way. You're stopping there.
All right, with you. You've got to lean forward.
Am I leaning forward?
Oh, not too far, Come back. Drop you on the floor now.
Now, while all this is going on, of course, the guests are arriving. So you've established the church, you've established who's there already. Get outside quick. Start getting the people arriving. But be careful. Don't put it on a tripod and leave it in the same place. Because if you do, you get jump cuts of all these people jumping down the same alley. Now, this is from another wedding. So here we are. You're capturing the last moment of the groom and the best man talking before they get taken into the church. They get taken into the church. All the friends have gone inside. You've got to get down to the gateway as soon as possible and start to capture the bridesmaids arriving. Now again, you've got to give yourself time to allow for the car to arrive and for them to get out. So you have to. It's a mental calculation of are they arriving, and if they are, somebody gives you a shout from somewhere saying they're here, and you've got to run for it and get the shots. Now, of course, you've run down to the gate. You've just caught the bridesmaids arriving. They've gone back to fetch the bride. You're puffed. You're out of breath. You've got to hold that camera steady. So you've got to make sure that your handheld technique is good. Always trying to use the camera forming a triangle. Always trying to give it the steadiest way you can possibly. Then the bride arrives, and of course this is the most important time because everybody, when they're watching the video, will want to see the brides, they want to see the bride's face, they perhaps want to hear the last conversation between the bride and her father, they want to see the dress, the flowers, the posy, they want to see the little bits of running around that the mother does and the bridesmaids, and the preparation before the last walk to the church. Now this is probably one of the most important parts, and you must not miss this. Let's look at this example.
Yes, it's all good. Okay, now just this way for me. Turn a little more towards me, Seth, please. No, that's it, just that much. That's it. That's nice. Good, that's lovely. Another one just there. Just looking towards each other. That's it. Good.
So you've got the close-ups from the faces, you've got the talk, you've got all the intimate chit-chat, but now you've got to get to the church to see them walking towards you. You don't watch the back of them, you've got to watch the front. So you've got to run again to the church. Right, so now we're at the church doorway with the vicar, as the vicar welcomes the bride to the church, perhaps the last few words before she's taken down the aisle. Now, at this particular point, you might be outside of the church looking at the back of the bride and the bride's father and the vicar. There is this entourage. It's a very small gateway. You have to get past them to get inside the church to have them walking down towards the altar, where you can capture the expression of the groom as he sees his wife for the first time. Now, this is a lovely shot if you can do it, but you've got to get past an awful lot of people, and again, don't forget you're carrying all this equipment, so you've got to try and do the best you can and establish yourself in a very steady position for the first 2 minutes or so of the service.
Now, this is from a different wedding, which illustrates this nicely.
Now, there are 2 points of view as to how to shoot a wedding. Once you're inside the church, you can either shoot it and shoot everything that moves, all the verses of the hymns, all the sermons, all the prayers, etc., 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 or you can cut it down to an acceptable part. My particular view, my personal view, is to shoot the first verse of each hymn, just the actual wedding ceremony itself, from the part where they say, "Is there anybody here who knows any reason why these two people can't get together?" to the part where they start to be blessed. But it's a personal thing, and it's up to you. And obviously, if there are special guests there, perhaps doing a reading or singing a song or whatever, it's nice to capture everything they're doing. So here we are inside the church. We've got the first part of the verses. As I say, probably the most important part is the actual vows and the actual wedding ceremony itself, but we've already seen what can go wrong. And then, of course, there's the signing of the register. And you can get the part where everybody breathes a sigh of relief, they all congratulate each other, and start signing the register. So once they've signed the register, you now have got some more sprinting to do. You have to get down to the end of the aisle to make sure that you see the husband and wife take their first walk towards you, and then you have to decide whether you stay there and watch them go out of the door from behind, or you walk out backwards before them. Now, of course, if you're out in front of them, then you can get them coming out of the church and all the guests coming out of the church, the relief, the animation. But if you stay inside the church, although you'll get people filing out, you'll be stuck behind them and you'll miss all these first-time opportunities which are happening outside the church. The choice is yours where you go, but if you're outside, you'll start to see people become more animated, more comfortable with their surroundings, relief that it's over, and the family will start talking to each other. Now, it's at this point you'll notice that the tripod starts to come useful, because then you can start using the telephoto lens to get in close to people's expressions and really capture some of the conversations and find out what's going on.
What do you do with no hands? No problem. That's lovely. You parents, please. Tony? Tony?
Let's stop the action here and take a longer look now at the background towards making a polished wedding video and some problems you might come across. Steve Jenkins.
The production of a good wedding video is, in my opinion, very demanding, but it's also an excellent way for the amateur to learn very good basic principles. I think the key to it all, of course, is to remember that it's one-off. You don't have a second opportunity to enable you to do the shots again. So it's very demanding, a lot of pressure. I've actually produced in the past very many wedding videos. I think it's a very good way of learning basic techniques. Producing a wedding video using a single camera it is very important basically to plan out exactly what you're going to do in advance, to recce your locations, to do a basic script or storyboard, to plan out what kinds of shots. Don't be over ambitious. Certainly you have to check the basic things about, are you allowed to video in the church, of course, and things like that. But think very carefully about your locations.
The service has been your storyboard, of course. But what if the ceremony is not a traditional one? Malwyn Ransom from Take Two Video Productions. Well, Malwyn, we've actually come across you hard at work here, and it's obvious to see that you're editing a wedding, but it doesn't strike me as a traditional one.
No, this is a Jewish wedding.
And did the fact it was a Jewish wedding pose any problems for you?
The main problem was the language. The service here was in Hebrew.
And how does that, you mentioned it was the problem, the language in Hebrew, how can that be a problem when you're filming?
Well, we use the dialogue as a storyboard to frame the shots.
So you're actually working around what's happening around you on the day then?
Yes.
And is it important actually to plan and look at a wedding to see what to film?
Yes, yes. The positioning at the service is quite important.
So the planning is an important aspect there?
Yes.
So if someone, say, were going to buy a camcorder now, and the first thing they wanted to do was film a wedding in the family, could you give them any hints and tips towards a better production with their camcorder?
Well, regarding the service, it's always wise to get permission from the church and your positioning so that you're not upsetting anyone in the church.
A word upon situation now. You can't set up where you feel like it. This is a religious ceremony after all, not a film set. And when you spoke to the minister, prior to all this frantic activity, perhaps at the rehearsal, or upon first arriving at the church, he will have given you a fixed point from which to shoot, or maybe offered you a couple of spots. Whatever you do, don't assume when you come to actually film the service that a much better place perhaps would be in the aisle or next to the altar. Respect the minister's good judgment, otherwise he is quite entitled to tell you, in front of everyone, your misjudged assumption. In fact, it is quite surprising how switched on most ministers are towards good vantage points regarding video in church. Very often, a camera person will have to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of their position quickly. If you find yourself behind a screen, make sure that it doesn't become too obvious an intrusion in your shot. You might even be offered to shoot from the pulpit. Possibly beware this invitation, as at first it might seem the ideal spot, especially if it offers a grandstand view of the church, but you might end up looking at the back of the bride and groom from about 15 foot high, as well as again feeling like the focus of everyone's attention.
I remember clearly on one occasion I was restricted to the pulpit, and the vicar instructed me that I was not allowed to be seen, so therefore I was crouched down in a pulpit for the entire duration of the service, and that was quite demanding, just to get a decent vantage on the couple.
So, you've got into position just before the bride enters the church. At this time, and just before the organ strikes up, try to get a shot of the groom and the best man. Just like you, they'll have a lot on their mind, and invariably they'll probably react when they see the camera pointing at them. Be aware of how you intend to film the service, if you are going to film it at all. Have you enough tape? If the tape end light starts flashing now, you're in real trouble. Although, as Bob mentioned, many people prefer a condensed version of the service on video nowadays, so possibly keep to the format he suggested when you begin to film this. So, you're now well into the service. Before you know it, you're at the marriage vows. This is a crucial time, for many obvious reasons, not least of which is the possibility that the minister, with his back to you, might unconsciously move into your shot and effectively ruin your framing. This is going to make you work much harder, and you might have a picture of just the bride or just the groom, depending on where you're shooting from. You must try to save this shot if this should happen. If you have room to maneuver, try to change your position slightly. Do this gradually if possible, just in case you need to use the footage as you're doing this. Or frame the shot wider. Or perhaps frame the bride or groom or whoever you can see more clearly.
I, Andrew, take you, Susan, to be my wife.
We'll run a few marriage vows now.
You, Susan, to be my wife. To have and to hold. To have and to hold. From this day forward. From this day forward. For better, for worse. For better, for worse. For richer, for poorer. For richer, for poorer. In sickness and in health. In sickness and in health. To love and to cherish. To love and to cherish. As long as we both shall live. As long as we both shall live. According to the will and purpose of God. According to the will.
Getting good sound is important, as you can see. It helps to have another mic on a camcorder, perhaps a directional one. I found that a directional mic is a very useful thing at weddings, especially at the time of the marriage vows, as the bride and groom can tend to be very quiet compared to the minister's voice.
From this day forward.
If you have the time and the means, a radio mic placed on the groom beforehand might help in situations where you seem to be a long way off from the couple. But they can just be another item to worry about if you're operating on your own. What is essential, though, is a pair of headphones or an earpiece just to confirm that you're getting good, clear sound. Once you have mastered good camera technique, you can really concentrate on editing in camera, choosing your shots as you go, which can make a wedding video much more enjoyable to watch later on.
Good point to remember is to edit as much as you can in camera, because if you don't have any access to editing facilities, it's much better. If you do have a basic editing setup as featured in the editing program, so much the better. It's probably more important to edit in camera and get it right because it's a one-shot deal. It's much harder than a corporate in some respects because it is only one day. You can't ask everybody to turn up the next day if you get it wrong.
If you don't have editing equipment, remember that with sufficient battery power you can use the standby facility throughout the duration of the day, and you can do successful in-camera editing and then just give the video to the people involved at the end of the day.
Again, just obey the basic rules of program production, establishing shots, cutaways, etc. A little planning can make a very watchable finished program. I've worked on weddings that have been shot on 2 cameras and subsequently edited to give a far more polished look. With 2 cameras, of course, the pressure of trying to be in 2 places at once is immediately reduced. You can set one camera at the back of the church, for example, with the other in the usual spot as just described. Then, as the bride enters the church, for example, you can cut between the best shots from either camera. Even if you haven't got a second camera operator, and you've still got the time, you could leave a second camera locked off at the back of the church, as we've done here. Be careful though where you leave it. Now I thought this was a safe place, but even here it was knocked slightly out of place just as the service started. Of course, when churches were built, I suppose that the architects at that time had scant regard towards the future invention of the camcorder. And this is highlighted, no pun intended, by the mixed and varied lighting which all churches seem to provide. Not immediately obvious, but nonetheless a relevant point, is stained glass windows. Now these can produce colour casts, perhaps resulting in a green bride, for example. Or the minister might give his address to the congregation with a strong light source from the window doing its best to spoil your shot. Remember, the backlight compensator can help in this event, as we looked at in Volume 1. I found that almost without exception, all the people in the industry that I've talked to have discounted the use of a video light in these situations. They can be an enormous distraction for everyone, and many churches frown upon their use. Again, as we've looked at in Volume 1, current camcorders can pull out very good detailed and colour pictures in almost all conditions, including churches. Right, let's fast forward now to the bride and groom coming down the aisle. This is another opportunity to get a key shot of the day. Look out for the photographer though. At this point he may well take a position just in front of you, which might spoil your shot, but he won't be there for long. So just appreciate that he's doing his job just as much as you are. We're nearly out of the church, and by now you will be thinking ahead again. Changing colour balance perhaps for outside, and audio levels if you have them, to allow for the church bells perhaps.
Oh no.
Right, so you've captured them outside of the church, and the length of time that they're there usually depends on 2 things, the weather and the photographer. Now the photographer can be a main part of your video, and he can be the reason that people are standing around in lines. If you don't show the photographer, it seems strange that these people are lining up. So it's a good excuse to show him and show what's going on.
Probably the best shots of the day now. Get yourself in a good position, preferably as close to the photographer as possible, as he's actually going to set the shot up. And be prepared for some pushing at this point. People will not appreciate that you need to get a steady shot. They'll be much more interested in showering the bride and groom with rice and confetti. Let's look at these examples. Again, a cutaway or 2, just before they lead to the car. If you place yourself against the back window and it's open, you are most likely to get some good comments from them now.
Yeah. It was beautiful ceremony. Everything was nice.
You will actually see them start to physically relax, as they will, for the first time of the day, be together, well, almost on their own, with the prospect of a breather as they are driven to the reception.
Now, if you can, to make the continuity nice, you've got to try and get to the reception before they do, allowing for traffic and weather and the usual problems, and capture them arriving at the reception and again going into the reception.
Just like the service, no two wedding receptions are the same. You'll just need to have your wits about you and keep your eyes open for the unusual. To get shots like these, you have to work fast, but they are definitely worth the effort. Again, use the tripod if possible, and use the telephoto end of the lens to give the shot more interest. Just like for the church shots, introduce establishing shots and various angles of interest. Everyone is much more animated, and you can see how you can usefully capitalize on those unguarded moments that are bound to arise. Again, use the photographer occasionally if photographs are taken here, and very often there is a tendency nowadays for more photographs to be taken in the hotel grounds, which can offer more space and better backdrops than those of the churchyard. You will probably find that for the first time since you started out with your camcorder, some 5 to 7 hours or so, as if you began at the bride's home, that you will have some breathing space now. You could usefully have a quick look at the reception room and plan where you're going to set up the camera. Before the reception meal, you might have a lineup of guests to film as well. Again, don't film all this. It can go on for ages if there are a couple of hundred guests. Just vary your shots and get a flavour of this for the film. It's a good idea to set your camcorder up on a tripod if you intend to cover all the speeches. A useful tip here is to go for height. You'll need it, for as soon as the bride and groom are welcomed into the room, you'll lose them among the guests. Also, it may be a good idea to frame the top table like this. You can frame the bride, the groom, their family, the best man and bridesmaids more tightly, as well as seeing all their reactions to the speeches later on. It's not a good idea to film the guests eating. If you are doing this as a commission, I'd suggest you leave them to eat their meal for now and come back for the cutting of the cake. Again, when this happens, make sure you are close enough to get the shots. We've mentioned microphones many times in this series, and we'll do it one last time now. For speeches, which might well last for anything up to an hour in extreme cases, an additional mic is essential. Use a directional one on the camera, or here, as we've done, with a mic on a table itself. We'll switch between the camera mic and the table mic just to illustrate the difference. Firstly, the camera mic.
3 or 4 weeks up to a wedding, you know, you get how is things coming on, and you
Another table mic.
arranged. And then as soon as you walk out of the church under those pikes, they all start saying, well, what's it like to be married?
With the speeches over, all that's left to film now is the evening party. You'll need stamina now if you've been on the go all day. Often, these take a while to get going, and if there's a disco, the lack of light may mean grainy pictures. If you can edit your footage with an effects mixer later on, you could really give this the top of the pops treatment. If you're covering a do, where the bride and groom leave after the reception, then this makes a very nice end to the video also. If you intend to edit weddings, then quality must be paramount, and it's surprising how much video has moved on in technology since that wedding of 10 years ago, with that youthful looking groom. Today, the demands of clients has grown along with the technology. Charles Manolescu.
You may be interested to know that in Italy the norm is to shoot and edit a wedding video in Betacam. This seems to have become the traditional thing in Italy, and that idea is spreading to other countries. People are expecting a better quality result. They are looking for higher resolution. They are looking for brighter colours, perhaps titles, perhaps nice music. It is all. It's at the end of the day, it's what people are beginning to expect. So therefore, the wedding videographer, if I can use that term, is having to keep up with the latest technology that his business can allow him to use.
Obviously, it takes a lot of time and patience to make a good wedding video. If you can't film the service, perhaps because the vicar won't allow you into the church, or possibly for some other reason, then you could consider going along to the church the night before and filming the flowers, and setting this to music in your finished film. At the end of the film, again with an effects mixer, you could set to music the highlights of the day. There are so many possibilities with wedding videos. It can be so creative. Even if you just edit in camera, you can get so much more from your hobby. Some final words.
But at the end of the day, shoot the speeches, capture the atmosphere, perhaps a bit of the party, but whatever you do, when the party starts, put the camera down and enjoy it.